Welcome to the last installment of the Iowa Files for the 2023-2024 year. This free public series is made possible through partnerships with the West Des Moines Public Library and the financial support of the Iowa Arts Council and Friends of the Foundation of the West Des Moines Public Library, Diana and Scott Hatfield, and the West Des Moines Historical Society's members and donors. We're only 80 days away from the best 11 days of Iowa of the year, which is the Iowa State Fair. Fair CEO and manager Jeremy Parsons is a very passionate advocate for all things fair related, and he's brought a plethora of historical pictures and information to share with us today. So let's give him a warm welcome.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good to be on this side of Des Moines today. As the introducer said, my name is Jeremy Parsons. I've been CEO of the Iowa State Fair since March of 23. So I guess I've been there just more than a year, so I'm no longer the new guy, I guess, necessarily. But look forward to telling you a lot more about the Iowa State Fair. I'm a native Iowan. I grew up in Leon, Iowa. Anybody know where Leon is? Down in southern Iowa. I'm a Leon, Iowa boy. Came to this job. I spent some time working at the Iowa State Fair in college, did a few other things, and then came to this job after 12 years as CEO of the world's greatest county fair. Anybody know where the world's greatest county fair is? The Clay County Fair in Spencer. That's right. That's right. So 12 years as a CEO of the world's greatest county fair in Spencer. Very unique event. If you're familiar with the Clay County Fair, Spencer, Iowa, population 10,000. Welcomes more than 300,000 guests over the 10 days of the Clay County Fair in September. So if you ever need an excuse, go to Okoboji. Go to Okoboji in mid-September and catch the Clay County Fair while you're there. They're just 10 miles apart. But again, since March, been CEO at the Iowa State Fair. So today we're just going to talk a little bit about the history of the fair, kind of the behind-the-scenes look at the fair. We can get into what's going to be new at the 2024 fair if you want, but I kind of like talking about who we are and where we came from, because we're a unicorn in the state of Iowa, and I'll explain how we're a unicorn a little later. But the Iowa State is the largest single event in the state. It is one of the oldest and largest agricultural or industrial expositions in the country. It is nationally ranked travel destination by media. Anybody read the New York Times book, 1,000 Things to Do Before You Die? That was a bestseller book that the New York Times put out. Literally, it's like the ultimate bucket list. 1,000 things in the world that you need to do before you die, and one fair is on that list, and that's the Iowa State Fair. We're also, of course, the inspiration for the original novel, the original novel State Fair. Of course, that was made into 3 movies, and then a Broadway musical, which actually debuted here in Des Moines before it went to Broadway in the late 1990s. So it's an interesting place that really is a centerpiece, really, of Iowa culture in many different ways. So that first fair, appropriately, was in Fairfield in 1854. So as historians, you know, the state of Iowa was founded in 1846. And of course, those settlers kind of started in the southeast portion of our state and then moved north and then west. So Fairfield in 1854 was kind of somewhat the epicenter. The state capital was just up the road in Iowa City. Burlington, Keokuk were the largest cities in the state. So it made sense to have that first fair in Fairfield in 1854. They discovered, however, when I do this presentation for school kids, I always ask them, what type of cars did people drive to that first state fair in 1854? Good, all right. None of you shouted out a Studebaker or anything like that. All right, very good. Obviously, with horse and buggies, it was difficult, very, very difficult to get to the fair. And so the State Agricultural Society, which was the group who started the first state fair, the State Agricultural Society decided, well, let's take the fair on the road. So from 1854 to 1878, the Iowa State Fair traveled Cedar Rapids, Oskaloosa, Keokuk, Burlington, Davenport, Dubuque, Fairfield again, Clinton. Several communities hosted the fair. It literally rotated every year. Basically, they took a county fairgrounds and said, well, this year it's going to host the state fair. Obviously, you could understand why. that's the only way people could really get around to what was happening. But by 1878, it was obvious that Des Moines was going to be the center of the state, especially as railroad traffic became more and more important. So in 1878, the Iowa State Fair moved to Des Moines. It moved to Browns Park. Anybody know where Browns Park is or was? Browns Park, University to the south, between 40th and 50th. Yeah, back in those days especially, but go University between 40th and 50th. That was the first Iowa State Fairgrounds. So not very far from here, a lot closer than the current one. Yeah, between 40th and 50th. Yeah, University was the southern border of it. I think based on what I've researched, I think it went as far as Pleasant Road, maybe Pleasant Lane. Anyway, but between 40th and 50th, so somewhere in that area. However, that space was not big enough. It was only about 70 acres, and so the fair was rapidly outgrowing that space. So in 1886, a farm came for sale, and that was the Calvin Thornton Farm in East Des Moines. And if you've been to the state fair, you know that the Calvin Thornton Farm would have been a horrible farm because it was really hilly. So, of course, they sold it to the state for the fair. So anyway, that's what I tell people all the time. The reason why the Iowa State Fair is where it is in true Iowa fashion is because it's horrible farmland. So we'll do the fair there. So 1886, the Thorntons sold their farm and that original 200 acres to the state of Iowa for use for the state fair. For those of you that have attended the Iowa State Fair, and I'm going to assume all of you have been there at least once or 100 times, when you go up the hill towards the campgrounds, at the top of the hill is Grandfather's barn, right? That barn is the original Thornton farmstead barn. So that barn actually predates the fair. But that was the original Thornton barn. There was a home right next to it where they lived. And then kind of just over a little bit from that original barn is Pioneer Hall, building you're all familiar with. Any of you called a husband or a hog or threw a rubber chicken or a rolling pin or any of those things? Pioneer Hall was the first building actually constructed for the fair and is the only building that remains from that first fair. So that kind of gives you where the fairgrounds started even was up in that hilly part on the east end. Currently now, of course, the grounds are 450 acres, 160 acres of campgrounds, all listed on the National Registry of Historic Places. And we'll talk more about this in a minute, but most of those buildings, of course, do predate World War I. There were some times the fair was not held, a few years. Interestingly, the fair was held all through the Civil War. As I mentioned, that first fair in 1854, they still trucked right through 1860, 61, 62, 63, 64. 1898, though, the Spanish-American War called a halt to the Iowa State Fair. And then from 1942 to 1945, the fair was a casualty, of course, of World War II. Really for two reasons. One reason, of course, was a lot of rationing was going on. You don't need to drive to Des Moines to go to the state fair. We're trying to conserve rubber and gas and all those things. The other piece was the U.S. Army actually rented the entire state fairgrounds during the war for munitions storage. So all of those big brick livestock barns during World War II were used for storage for the U.S. Army. Of course, people often want to know also a little bit about epidemics. The fair survived the Spanish flu of 1918 and the polio epidemic, but 2020 was definitely no fair due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So some notable events at the Iowa State Fair. Amelia Earhart was not an Iowan. I believe she grew up in Kansas. Don't quote me on that. I know I'm being live streamed. There's probably fact checkers out there on the internet right now. But I believe she grew up in Kansas. Yes. Atchison, Kansas. Thank you. Very good. But she was at the 1909 fair and saw her first airplane with her sisters and her father, and she was not impressed. She was unimpressed. In the early years of aviation in Iowa, I believe this was the year that the plane took off from in front of the grandstand, did a loop around the Capitol, and came back. Something that we would not think twice about today, but if that's the first time you'd ever seen an airplane, that would have been quite the sight. Same way with television. First television ever seen in the Iowa State Fair was in the Varied Industries building.
Did that impress
I don't know if that did or not. Yeah, I don't know. Back to the war, 35,000 people came to the 1917 Iowa State Fair grandstand to salute the soldiers marching off to war. At that time, train tracks, of course, ran to the fairgrounds, and my understanding is the soldiers marched by, loaded on trains, and off they went. What's interesting, what I find interesting about this, obviously, you think of the emotions of that day, but what I more think about is the fact that that is roughly the same grandstand we use today. Only 17,000 people can fit in that, so obviously the state fire marshal was not around the day they threw 35,000 people in there. But again, I think more reminders of the history of Iowa really is wrapped up in the Iowa State Fair. For 10 years, the Iowa State Fair owned an elephant. In 1929, the Iowa State Fair Board went to the school children of Iowa. I believe the Des Moines Register was involved in this. And thousands of children across Iowa donated a dime, 10 cents. And all that money was put together, and Baby Mine, as in it's mine, I helped pay for it, was purchased. And for 10 years, an elephant lived at the Iowa State Fair and greeted fairgoers. Down there in the corner, you see a clip, or not, just a snapshot from a KCCI news story. Currently in the Fun Forest area, there are some concrete statues that honor Baby Mine. The fair also did 3 train crashes, 1896, 1922, and 1932. And I'm going to see, I think I tried this a second ago. We're going to walk. 1932, of course, there was a presidential election. So the Iowa State Fair decided to lay a section of railroad track down in front of the grandstand. At one end, they took a steam locomotive and painted the word Hoover. Of course, Iowa's native-born president. And they loaded that train locomotive and the car behind it with dynamite. And then about 600 feet away, the other end of the grandstand, they took another steam locomotive, loaded it with dynamite and a car, wrote Roosevelt on the side, and directed them towards each other. And as you can see in 1932, 45,000 people packed into the grandstand to watch those two trains collide. No one was killed during any of these train crashes. However, multiple injuries did occur. As you could imagine, two fully loaded locomotives, when they crash, shrapnel is going to go everywhere. But now all we do at the grandstand are these really boring concerts. I don't know why we're not doing. Now, if there's an insurance agent in the room, I want to talk to you afterwards, because if you'll insure this, I'd love to do it again. But some other things that happened in the grandstand: an airplane dogfight in 1929. So 2 or 3 airplanes battling it out, kind of playing the ultimate game of chicken. 1930, human cannonballs in front of the grandstand. And then in 1937, a small home was built in front of the grandstand. People packed into the grandstand to watch a plane crash intentionally into that home. Again, the pilot survived, but all people do today is sit around and watch their television. There's some real exciting entertainment that we need to be doing again at the Iowa State Fair. People always ask about weather at the fair. Anybody at the fair on August 16th, 1983? That was a 108-degree day, the hottest day on record at the Iowa State Fair. We were 2 days at the 2023 fair, neared 100, but weather is always an important part for sure at the fair.
And whatever's going on with cleaning up the streets and
Yeah.
the closing and detours.
Yeah, that's always important too. Road construction is always important. I mentioned our historic buildings, and I think this is something that we're most proud of at the Iowa State Fair, is the fact that over the centuries, we've been able to preserve the fairgrounds. When you look at even some original plans as far back as 1900, obviously the fairgrounds was moved there in 1886, but there around the turn of the century, around 1900, some major layout and landscape design was done of the grounds. And that concept of the Grand Concourse and the Ag Building and the Triangle and Rock Island, all of that was laid out early in the 1900s. And then, of course, the buildings came around it. The Livestock Pavilion was built in 1902. The Agriculture Building, 1904. The Administration Building, where our offices are located, that's the big, beautiful building with the big porch around it, 1908. Then all of the livestock barns came right after that, really in the 1910s through the 1930s. And so that's really important to us. A lot of fairs have lost that history. They've knocked those buildings down, and they've kind of turned their fairgrounds into parking lots, maybe instead of preserving that park-like atmosphere with the trees. But we've been fortunate to do that. And a lot of that has been the work of the Blue Ribbon Foundation. The Blue Ribbon Foundation is 31 years old. It's had 2 directors in its time. Of course, currently it's Peter County from here in West Des Moines. Prior to that, it was John Putney. But through the partnership of the Blue Ribbon Foundation, more than $200 million has been raised in the last 30 years to restore and fix up those buildings. And you look at a building like the 4-H building in Youth Inn, completely renovated. They were built just to be single-use buildings, and now we've turned them into fully heated and cooled buildings. And that's really important. When you really think about the Iowa State Fair from a business perspective, we'll talk about this in a minute. The Iowa State Fair operates on a $42 million a year budget, so it's a big business. But we generate 85% of that income roughly in 11 days. Now, any of you go to a bank and say, I've got this great idea for a business. I'm only going to be open 11 days a year, and I'm going to do it outside, and we'll make enough money to survive for a whole year. How about you give me a loan and we'll start this business? That's really not going to happen. But when you think about it, that's exactly what we do at the fair. And so these buildings that are restored and renovated for us allow a lot of usage throughout the rest of the year that, quite frankly, didn't happen 20 or 30 years ago. So for us now on a typical weekend in the middle of winter, whether it's middle of winter or middle of summer, there'll be 5 or 6 events going on at the fairgrounds all the time. Last night I was on a walk through the fairgrounds. We had 2 graduation receptions, a wedding reception, and a quinceanera, and another flea market type event. All were going on yesterday. So that's just kind of a typical Saturday for us. But again, it's because we have these buildings that we can use throughout the year. We're in a major project right now, a $25 million renovation of our livestock barns. The sheep, swine, horse, and cattle barns, again, very historic. The sheep barn was built in 1915. That's the barn with the beautiful terracotta blue tile and the ram's heads all around the building. Swine barn was built multiple stages starting in 1907. Horse barn, first phase of the horse barn was 1910, and then several additions after that, and the cattle barn 1920. So again, all these barns have need a lot of work, and we're really excited about doing that. That really is the cornerstone of the Iowa State Fair, is livestock, specifically 4-H and FFA kids exhibiting at the fair. We're fortunate that even though as agriculture in Iowa changes, our entry numbers of those 4-H and FFA youth showing livestock at the fair continues to increase. We had a 6% increase in 2023, for example. So we need to make sure these livestock barns are in tip-top shape really for the next 150 years for sure. And that's really the focus. Again, as the slide says, we started with the sheep barn in 23. It's a couple-year project. It's going to take us, this is going to be an 8 to 9, 10-year project by the time we get all of these livestock barns done. Fair attendance is always interesting to me. You think back to 1919, I don't know what the population of Iowa was in 1919, but still 408,000 people came to the fair. And then you get to 2023, which was our second highest attended fair ever, 1.133 million. And so what's always interesting about that is the fact that when you think of the population of Iowa as a little more than 3 million, although some people come to the fair more than one day, you know, a third of Iowans attend the Iowa State Fair. And that always leads back to the point, well, is the Iowa State Fair the largest state fair in the country? And the answer to that is no. Our friends at the Minnesota State Fair, for example, they draw close to 2 million people over the 12 days of their fair, but they're right in the heart of Minneapolis-St. Paul. So again, you think of population. Our friends at the State Fair of Texas, they like their fair so much, they run it for 24 days. So they do draw, 2.5 million people, but they're right in the center of Dallas. So, when you look at kind of a per capita thing, Iowans definitely attend their fair. Then, of course, you see that huge dip in, 2020 with nothing. So, we survey fairgoers all the time, every few years, asking them what their favorite things are to do at the fair. I don't think this list has probably changed much over the years, in fact. Food, number one on that list, very important to fairgoers, especially now as we do all sorts of things with the new food contest and getting people excited about that new food. People love the free entertainment at the Iowa State Fair. They love to sit at those free stages, whether it's the Bill Riley Talent Show or some of the night entertainment. They love to go through the Varied Industries building and, pick up yardsticks and more yardsticks and tattoos, you can put on your arms and all those types of things. Fans, you think about all the things in the Varied Industries building. The number 4 reason people tell us they come to the fair is just to watch other people. And I think you could all tell stories of wow, they came to the fair today and that's what they wore, right? That's kind of... Number 5 is the Ag Building and the Butter Cow. The Iowa State Fair has been carving a butter cow since, I believe the year is 1914. So that's been a form of art that's been around for a long, long time. And of course, the number 6 reason why people tell us they attend the fair is really for the livestock shows. And I think that's really something that we focus on a lot at the fair is we want this to be the place where there literally is something for everyone, and especially for families. You can come to the fair with your kids and their kids, with your kids and grandkids, and you're going to find something throughout the day. Now, you may have to split up and come back together and meet at the Pepsi clock, by the administration building porch. But there's going to be something there really for everybody to enjoy. So this photo here really talks about who the Iowa State Fair is. And I mentioned earlier that we are a unicorn. The Iowa State Fair is an authority of the state of Iowa. So we are not a state agency. The property is owned by the state of Iowa, but essentially as the Iowa State Fair Authority, we're allowed to operate as a private business, as a private entity. The Iowa State Fair Authority is governed by all these people you see in the red shirts in front. Those are the members of the Iowa State Fair Board. The state of Iowa is split into 6 districts, northwest, north central, northeast, and across the bottom. And each of those districts, every year, we have a convention, the State Agricultural Convention, and the county fairs of Iowa come together and they elect representatives for the State Fair Board. And so each district gets 2 representatives. So here in Des Moines, you're in the South Central District, so your representatives are Randy Brown from Osceola and Joe Reynolds from Indianola. Those are the 2 that represent Des Moines. But every portion of the state is represented. Also serving on our board is the governor of the state of Iowa, the Secretary of Agriculture, and the president of Iowa State University. So those 15 individuals or their representatives really have full authority to put on the Iowa State Fair. Iowa Code gives them the authority to do that. Those 15 hire, per Iowa Code, a secretary to the board. And that's the role I play. My official title is Secretary of the Iowa State Fair Board. And then with that also comes the title of CEO of the Iowa State Fair and manager of the fair itself. So this is an organization, as far as the secretary position, as I mentioned, the Iowa State Fair started in 1854. I am the 13th secretary of the Iowa State Fair. So what that means is if I don't screw it up, I get to stay a while. So that's really what that means. But it is an honor to serve in this capacity. I'm the first actual native Iowan to be secretary of the Iowa State Fair Board since Kenny Folk back in the 1960s and 1970s. So excited really for this opportunity. So as I mentioned, the board hires me as secretary to the board and as CEO, and then I hire the rest of the full-time staff. And as you can see, all the people in the blue shirts, I have a typo here, so that should be 70 full-time employees. So it's kind of interesting when people think about that. Like, you do that like all year round? That's your job for a living? And the answer is yes for 70 of us. But as I mentioned, we host more than 200 events a year. So there are always things going on. And you think of a business, as I mentioned, with a $42 million a year budget, you know, we have an accounting staff and we have a marketing staff and we have people that handle all of our livestock competitions and book our entertainment, HR people, you know, just like that. But also, because we also are responsible for a 400-acre property, on our staff we have full-time electricians and plumbers and carpenters and IT guys and landscapers. You know, the fair has 2 full-time gardeners. You know, so it also, we're a business and we're also a city. So when you think about that, I think you see there's plenty for us to do. This time of year, our size doubles to about 150 employees. We hire a lot of summer college interns to work for us in the summers. It takes a lot of extra guys to mow the grass and do those types of things. And then when the fair comes, we're up to 1,600 employees. So, and many of those employees just get one paycheck a year, but they work at our admission gates or they sell tickets. They help clean out the barns. We become if any of you have ever done HR, or if you've ever had a job, you know you've got to fill out all of that payroll paperwork, you know, or all those W forms and I-9s and all those forms. And so we have about 1,400 people that every year we have to get all that paperwork in for them, and we're going to write them one check, and then we'll then we'll do it all again next year. And of course, thousands and thousands of volunteers are needed to put the fair on. And so that's kind of, people often ask, you know, who is in charge of the Iowa State Fair? And so, again, we're a unicorn. Back to that, we're not an agency of the state government, but we're not private. We're really kind of right in the middle, which allows us to really, I think, operate the best fair possible. When you think about the Iowa State Fair, though, some things are the same and some things have changed. The campgrounds have always been important at the Iowa State Fair. Campgrounds have always been important at the Iowa State Fair, as they still are today. So when you go to the Iowa State Fair campgrounds during the fair, there are 3,000 campsites. So you do the math on that, 3,000 campsites, and you say there's 3 or 4 people at each camper, usually there's more than that. That's quite the city in itself of 10 to 12,000 people during the fair. All of these campsites are reserved. So these 3,000 campsites, you can't just come in for one night. You have to stay the whole run of the fair. Any campers out there? We got some campers out there. So lucky you, right? So campsites can be transferred to a family member, but the notarized document. I'm telling you right now, if you have a campsite at the Iowa State Fair and you think you might get divorced, put that campsite in your prenup agreement or whatever you want to do, because there are some knockdown, drag-out fights over who gets that campsite. And the reason is this: if you wanted to have a reserved camping space at the fair, we'd put you on our list, and in 15 or 20 years, your spot will be available. That is the average wait for a spot, is between 15 and 20 years. Because of those 3,000 spots, so few come open a year. Of course, they get transferred to the next generation potentially. So again, you know, if you only got 8 or 9 spots a year, it takes a while to get through that list. So we know some people who will they'll have a child like born at 1 or 2 years, and they'll they'll put that child on the list. The hope is by the time they're an adult, they'll be able to have a spot. This young lady obviously did not do too well with her steer here. She's not very happy. But what I love about this photo, if you know anything about agriculture, cattle have changed. They're not short like that anymore. But in the background, you see the pavilion there through the back, which, is still used today. Some things haven't changed since 1902. That 4-H Grand Champion steer always selected in the livestock pavilion. And so, some things really never change. These kids enjoying root beer, sarsaparilla, Coke, something there at food stands. And of course, that's not changed either. That's not changed either. Again, another girl not having a fun time at the fair in the front of that roller coaster. Interestingly enough, in the 1930s and 1940s, the Iowa State Fair did have a permanent wooden roller coaster on the fairgrounds in the Midway area. A fully operating wooden roller coaster. Obviously, it was torn down as it reached the end of its useful life, but obviously now we still bring in about 40 rides at the fair through the Midway. Of course, that has really changed. That world has changed in the Midway piece. Now we really have our rides scattered, kind of a section for the older kids, a section for the younger kids. But again, that's an important part of why some people come to the fair. It's always interesting, some kids, you'll talk to some adults and they were told growing up that they could never go in the Midway, after a certain time at night. But always lots of memories at the fair, in lots and lots of different ways. And of course, that tradition continues on. Shopping in the Varied Industries building, always been key. As I mentioned, television was first debuted in Iowa at the Iowa State Fair in the Varied Industries building. WHO radio, when it was getting started back in the 1920s and 1930s, that's where the term Crystal Studio came from. Now, WHO has the Crystal Studios beside the Varied Industries building, but originally it was inside the Varied Industries building with glass, which is where the Crystal Studio name comes from. But obviously these people in their washers, ironers, looks like radio, all sorts of things there, standing around doing some shopping at the fair, and that's not changed at all either. Now the Varied Industries building now is at least air conditioned, which makes it a little more bearable to enjoy. Red carpeting down, but still it's the same. It's where people gather. And again, I think that's what really makes the Iowa State Fair unique. Is when you think about it, the Iowa State Fair is about tradition and it's about new things. And I tell people a lot of times, they ask what the hardest part of my job is, and it's navigating that balance, because half of our fairgoers are very traditional and say, don't you dare change a thing. When I come to the fair, I know where to buy my new fancy mop, and I know where to get my corn dog, and I know where to sit down and watch that Bill Riley talent show, and don't you dare change anything, because I know what I'm doing. And then you have another half of our fairgoer, though, who says, well, if it's the same as it was last year, I'm not going to go back. And so our job is to navigate the middle. And I think really we at the Iowa State Fair have been pretty successful at navigating that, because we've been in business for 170 years. And a lot of things don't last 170 years, but we have. And I think it's because we've understood, like this Varied Industries building, that while times change, some of the things can still stay the same. The tall corn contest still occurs. There's a photo just from last year up at Pioneer Hall. And then, of course, a photo from much earlier. 4-H has also been an important part of the fair. I don't know if the Waukee Wideawakes are still a 4-H club, but they were in 1920. So, but here you see 4-H kids getting ready for the 4-H parade. There used to be daily parades through the fair with the 4-H kids on floats. Again, back to the history, the building that's behind them is the building we were just talking about, is the sheep barn that we're restoring right now. It was just 5 years old when this photo was taken. And even though The Waukee Wide Awakes may not still be a 4-H club in Dallas County. 4-H presentations and 4-H is still, as I mentioned before, the cornerstone of the fair. Representatives from every county in Iowa and related to 4-H exhibit something at the fair, whether it's something in the 4-H exhibit building or livestock, but every county is represented. And again, we're really proud of that fact that we're a showcase for Iowa youth to learn and to really show off their skills while they're at the fair. And so the 4-H building is always a popular spot as well for people to watch the 4-H youth kind of do their thing. This photo I really love for a couple reasons. One is the ag building still pretty much looks the same. The other thing in this photo, if you look close, we obviously don't dress as nice when we go to the fair anymore. I expect to see you all in, floor length, woolen skirts, gentlemen, full jackets, suits. We don't really dress that nice anymore at the fair. But what I love about this photo is they're going into the ag building. I don't know if this was the first year the ag building was built in 1904, but in 2023, it really still looked the same. It still really looked the same. People talk about having their heads buried in phones. Well, this guy's got his head buried in the newspaper, taking a nap. Again, a photo from years ago, but still in the same cattle barn that we use today. So whether you're taking a nap next to your cow or just trying to do a selfie, it's a good place to be. It's a good place to be.
Happy cow.
Another interesting photo for several reasons. So the photo you're looking at, let's first talk about the structure you see in the background. That is the grandstand. Obviously, this is early turn of the century because of the combination of horse and buggy and cars. But this grandstand is still the grandstand being used today. Now, the original grandstand was built turn of the century, 1905, 1906, 1907. There was an expansion in 1917 and then another expansion in the 1930s. And that expansion that happened in the 1930s got it to its full length of the building. And then that's when the brick facade was put on. That's when the brick facade was put on in the 1930s. And then that became exhibit space underneath. But as you can see, originally, it was really just pretty open. Several things about this photo I like. First of all, this little boy here, he's all dressed up for his day at the fair in his knickers and his hat. Again, everybody very well dressed at the fair, very well dressed. The other thing that's interesting about this photo, of course, is the combination of what was happening in the world. You see a lot of cars, but you still see some horse and buggies. And obviously at this point in the fair's history in the early 1900s, you could still drive on the Grand Concourse, obviously. As you all know, during the fair, there's no place for people to drive because of that. So I always tell our public safety people, if we want to add a really fun thing at the fair, let's let people try to drive on the Grand Concourse, and we'll see. And we'll throw some horse and buggies in there as well, and and then make you all dress up. I mean, it'd be quite the day, wouldn't it? But again, these people, the grandstand has been part. Again, what I love about this photo is the flags on the roof of the grandstand are still there today. We still fly all those American flags up there every year. And this is what the grandstand now looks like when it's sold out for a concert. Butter sculpting, we were very fortunate for many years, nearly 50, that the woman on the left, Duffy Lyon, was our butter sculptress. And since then, she's been replaced by Sarah Pratt. And, so many things have been carved out of butter. Of course, last year we had butter Caitlin Clark, but we've had the Last Supper carved out of butter. We've had all sorts of things. And so we'll be announcing soon what those companion pieces will be. Every year there is a cow. The dairy cow, the breed rotates every year, so it's a different breed of dairy cow every year. And then, of course, we do the companion pieces. But again, we started carving butter sculptures prior to 1920. So, several generations of Iowans have stood in line and looked at the butter cow. And then you get back to the 1950s. This beautiful entrance I would love to bring back. It is neon, and that's one of my future goals to bring back. Obviously, as late as the 50s, you could still drive your cars in and out as well. But today, that becomes really, really difficult. As this picture of the second Saturday showed. And so, we are getting ready. We want you all to catch fair fever. We had some conversations with our marketing firm. Is it too close to COVID to be telling people to, catch the fever? We want you to catch that fair fever. But we're really excited. It's kind of a throwback theme to us. As I mentioned before, that first fair was in 1854. So this is the 170th anniversary of that first fair. So the graphics and the theme with Fair Fever, you'll see a throwback to the 70s. As we get ready to celebrate the fair August 8th through the 18th. An exciting fair is planned. As always, we've got several new attractions and features and some increased emphasis on what we call creature comforts at this year's fair. So you're going to see additional paved handicap parking at the fair. Additional lot was put in for that. We are adding a whole bunch of shade structures and picnic tables and benches throughout the grounds because we want you to enjoy your time at the fair. We've remodeled 2 of our sets of bathrooms, the restrooms next to the administration building, and one of the shower houses up in the campgrounds have been gutted and remodeled. So really our focus this year as we continue to work on the barn project is to continue to help you have a better time at the Iowa State Fair. And so that's really our focus. We also have a focus this year on some value for the fairgoer. So our nightly horse shows this year, the nightly draft horse competitions will be free. You'll no longer have to pay separate admission for those. So that will be free for you as well this year. Elwell Family Park, which is the new tractor pull area at the west. There's that small second grandstand now on the west end of the fairgrounds where we hold tractor pulls. We have actually increased that space to 8 days of activities, including antique tractor pulls and garden tractor pulls, and many of those events are free for you as well. So really our goal this year is for you, our fairgoer, to get a little more value for that fair admission and have a little better experience. We've also repaired a lot of sidewalks, which will help with people getting around as well. So we're excited to see you August 8th through the 18th. We have 80 days. For somebody in my position, that's equally exciting and terrifying. Both, because we've got a lot. We'll be ready for you on August 8th, don't you worry. But we got a lot of stuff to get done. So with that.
So before we turn it over to Jeremy for some questions, 2 things for West Des Moines Historical Society. One is if you are a Friends level donor to the West Des Moines Historical Society, which means that you contribute $100 in donation, you are invited on July 18th called Friends of the Fair. We'll get a tour of some of the museums that Jeremy had spoken about in his presentation. Additionally, if you're at that friend donation level, you're put into a raffle or a drawing for an exclusive VIP tour with Blue Ribbon Foundation, Peter County, and he will give you a tour of the fair when the fair is going on. So keep those 2 things in mind. So what questions do we have for Jeremy? I'll hand you the microphone so our live stream can hear you. Yeah.
She can hand you the mic.
I'll hand you the microphone.
Oh, okay. So my son and I have been going to the fair for about 15 years now, and I am a people watcher, and my very favorite thing was and we go several days to the fair, and every day I would get on the trolley and ride it for hours and hours and hours and get off for bathroom stops or to eat something or see something and then right back on the trolley and love that. I think it was a couple of years ago that the trolley didn't run, and as soon as I got there I went to the information desk and said, "Where's the trolley? I want to get on." And the only trolley was the one going up to the campground, and we aren't fortunate enough to have a spot up there.
Yeah.
So last year I asked again, and they said that it was because there was too much traffic is there any chance that you, for people like myself, I'm 79, I want to go, I don't want to go around in a scooter because that's too invasive, I feel for other people, for me, and walking those hills is a lot of, because we go early in the morning, we do ride the DART bus from and that's a real good perk that you have, and then we stay through the evening's entertainment. But is there any hope for the trolley in the future?
It's a great question. I'm going to answer it. I'm going to fill you in on a lot of background stuff. So we currently run 2 shuttle systems at the fair. One is in the north parking lot. We run a shuttle system in there to help you get to from the parking lot to the fairgrounds itself. And then, as you mentioned, the shuttle that goes up into the campgrounds. That loops through the campgrounds. However, even if you're not a camper, you can still ride that. And I would sure recommend doing that, because if you've never been up in the campgrounds, that is a riot up there. So anyway, but you can get on by the first church, and it will actually, you get on at the first church, and it will drop you off at the top of the hill by Pioneer Hall. So that saves you that hill at least, then loops you around. So that's not just for campers. Anybody could ride that. However, that's not enough. That's not, you're talking about the rest of the grounds. Absolutely. So, and one more thing about Clearfield Lions. The Clearfield Lions Club, if you know where Clearfield is, Clearfield's in southwest Iowa, down around Mount Ayr, Creston, down in that area. It's the largest Lions Club in the state, and Clearfield's a tiny community, probably 300 or 400 people, but I think everybody in Clearfield is a Lion. But they have operated that shuttle service. This is their 60th year. So with all that being said, you are correct. A few years ago, the fair stopped running that shuttle. It was a little bit of COVID, COVID issues coming back after COVID, and also some safety issues. However, we have to figure out a way to provide that service again.
Great.
And so there will be nothing for 2024. I'm just completely honest, nothing for 24. We're kind of too late in the game on that. But we will work out a solution for the future. Now, I don't know what that'll look like. Maybe it's a little different route. Maybe it's just earlier in the day before the crowds get heavy. But I have heard from many fairgoers like you. And, as I mentioned before, part of what we're doing this year is making the fair easier for you to enjoy, more places to sit down. I think it's like 50 picnic tables will be added to the ground. Lots of places for you to sit, shade structures. But we have to find a better way to get you around the grounds, because many of you depend on that shuttle service. So the answer is yes, we will find a solution to that in the future. But again, not for this year. So not for this year. But we will find a solution for the future. That's a great question, and thank you for asking.
I get one. Hello. I get one of those golf carts, rent a golf cart thing.
Oh, a little mobility scooter.
Yeah, and it's a bit more pricey, but you can come and go as you want to, stop, park, go do what you're going to get back on.
Yep.
There you go again.
I think that's a great solution for some people, but for others, and maybe they just need it for short periods of times or different things. Yeah, I think we have to figure out a way to provide that. So I don't know what that is going to look like yet, but I think we can overcome the challenges of that for sure.
Buildings and out, and sometimes they stop right in the middle and they can't get the thing to go, and that's why I like it.
I think it's I think it's back to I think it's really back to trying to provide, as we mentioned with the fair, it's something for everybody. And so back to that, can we provide various ways of transportation to get people around? So that's really what we're working on. But thank you for bringing that up.
Yes, whenever we go, we park at the Capitol.
Yeah.
And then take the bus to the fair, and they drop you off at the door. And then we would take the air thing?
Oh, the Sky Glider?
The Sky Glide up to the top, and then walk ourselves down.
Yeah, that's one way to do it as well. We're very pleased with our partnership with DART. We know that's a huge thing. In fact, of our 1.1 million fairgoers, last year, 230,000 people came to the fair on a DART bus. Yep, right there.
So I wanted to share, I'm an August baby. I was born during the fair. My first one was at 3 days old. I've gone every year since then, except for 2020, of course. And every year from the first to the last one, my favorite food is the veggie stands, fried pickles. So I was wondering, as the CEO of the fair, what is your favorite fair food?
Okay, so I brought a tradition with me from the Clay County Fair. By 9 o'clock the first morning of the fair, I've had a corn dog. Okay, that's how I start the fair. I don't do that every day. I do not do that every day. It depends. When you're working there every day, long hours, like some days a hot beef sundae at the beef place is great. But that last weekend when it was so hot, I just ate cups of watermelon from Beatty's stand there by where the giant slide used to be, and pickle dogs, the cold pickle dog. You know what I mean? So it really depends on what the weather's like. But pork chop on a stick, yeah, I can walk around with that for sure. So that's good too. And honey lemonade upstairs in the Ag building is good too.
Okay. I wanted. Have you heard anything about the Trump and Biden at the
sure.
fair?
Yeah, last year was a great year for my first year as CEO of the fair, welcoming 13 presidential candidates. So, yeah. Yeah. We have not at this point heard if either of the presidential candidates will come. For us at the Iowa State Fair, it's always kind of been more about that caucus cycle as they narrow it down. But if anybody wants to visit the fair, we will sure welcome them as always, and as long as they pay their admission, and we'll work through the process. And they all do pay admission. They do.
I think they'd like to be there. They get votes that way.
Well, I think that's why the Des Moines Register soapbox. Presidential candidates. Why wouldn't you want to come to a place where you've got a whole lot of Iowans together? It makes campaigning kind of easy. Makes campaigning kind of easy.
So speaking of the presidential candidates, do you think that for the next election we might have the train crash back?
Yeah, that's a good. Oh, look at this, Trump and Biden train crash. There's a thought. There's a thought.
I have a question.
Sure.
So is the butter cow, it's not 100% made out of butter, right? It's got like mesh, and then we put butter. Is that always how it's been? Like the 100 years since we've been doing it?
My understanding is it's always been that way. Several years ago that the fair actually unveiled the secret, that it was not solid. And that's been several years. My assumption is probably it's always kind of followed that. I'm not an art person. Is that called an armature? I think is kind of the wooden scaffolding and mesh that then the butter is applied to. So.
Yeah, because Caitlin couldn't get her arm up like that.
Right. Yeah, right. Right. Caitlin and her family were very gracious when we contacted them and said, "Can we carve you out of butter?" So they were very gracious, very gracious. That's I think as Iowans we understand that's a pretty high honor if you get carved out of butter at the state fair. That means you're kind of at the top.
Are there any other questions for Jeremy?
I might add something.
Yeah, sure.
I just read an article about the fair, and I'm trying to remember where it was, but it mentioned the West Side site.
Yes.
And that the southern border was Grand Avenue.
Oh, okay.
Not University. University would be.
Okay.
Yeah, and because it mentioned that the Plymouth Church and St. Augustine Church were where the fairgrounds were.
Thank you. That is correct. Now that you said that, I remember reading that. That was in the Register not too long ago, actually. So the southern border was Grand Avenue between 40th and 50th, not University. So thank you. There's a good fact check right there. I do remember that because the Congregational Church and St. Augustine's were in that area. Mm-hmm.
So how much money do all those vendors make? I mean, is it pretty lucrative for 11 days?
The question is, how much money do those vendors make? It really depends on what they sell. Some of them have multiple locations, a lot of different things like that. Obviously, they have, it's like any business, they have expenses. They have to, they have to have staff and supply their food. They pay a percentage of their sales to the fair as well, basically as rent, for lack of better words, for the licensed space. So it really is hard to say just because they're, You know, and you've got some that are big sit-down places like pork and beef. You know, and then you've got others that are kind of small, selling cups of watermelon. You know, so yeah.
You know, like last year, there was just such a long, long line for the pork.
Mm-hmm.
So,
On a stick, the pork is.
you know,
The whole
pork
building,
thing.
yeah.
So, I mean, we went down to the cattlemen's, but I don't know what you can do about the pork place.
Yeah.
It takes so long and the line was so long.
Yeah, I think last year, some of the, I guess, excitement was the fact that it was the new building. You know, it was a brand new structure that they had built. But yeah, you know, all those groups, so I know, like any business, they don't like long lines because they don't want you to wait. Obviously, they want you to move through the line. But yeah, it's always interesting. It seems like if you really want to sit down and enjoy a meal at the fair, you have to eat at odd times. And you've got to eat lunch at, 3 o'clock and dinner at 9 or something. I mean, you got to eat lunch at 10:30 in the morning, or you've got to kind of do a different time for sure.
That's what you have to remember. Iowa people eat at noon.
Right? Yeah, everybody wants to go eat at noon. Right? Yeah. Yeah. You can't do that. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to give Jeremy another round of applause.
Thank you.
So just as a reminder, we will have Iowa files returning for the next rotation. We'll have 8 planned, and we'll release those in the next couple months. But thanks for the West Des Moines Public Library. Thanks for you guys to come and recognize the importance of Iowa and local history. So we appreciate you guys coming out. I'm sure if you have more questions to Jeremy, he wouldn't mind staying around for a couple more minutes. But I hope you guys have a great time at the fair in August.
Yeah.